up, everybody? Sven Diesel here. We're going to be tying up a moose stimulator. This is basically a stimulator that we're using moose hair for. It's kind of a different material. I like it because the lengths are a little bit longer, but we're going to be using an Arex FW531. This is a size 10. I'll fish these in 8 to 14s typically. I'm using some Semperfli. This is a wax thread in a 12-aught in black. And of course, let's go ahead and get this started. We're going to be covering up these thread wraps, and we're not doing a naked body on this one, so our wraps aren't as important, but we want to make sure that we're just practicing good habits. And so we'll just lay down a little bit of thread here, trim out our tag end, kind of a little bit into the bend, and then we're going to grab some of this Nature Spirit. This is speckled moose body in brown. It's got a really neat color to it. I've got a hackle to match it. And so I'm just going to pull out roughly 8 to 12 hairs here. A good rule of thumb is a little bit sparser on the tail. This might be a little bit thick, but we'll go ahead and try and brush out any of this under fur or thin hairs that kind of get in there. And we really don't need the length for the tail, but we're just going to pull out any of the shorter ones and use kind of the best of the best. And I'm going to be using a small hair stacker here. You don't want to use too big a one, or it could make it difficult with these longer hairs. And so I think I have one smaller than this, but this one will do just fine. I love this stacker because it's got a cork bottom, so as I tap it, my wife doesn't hear me, and it's not annoying. So we got those stacked up. Let's go ahead and grab those out, and I'm measuring to do the tail roughly the length of the hook gap, and I'll go ahead and do some loose wraps all the way up to about where we're going to tie in our wing. And I've just done those loose. We're going to cinch them down here in a minute, and this is going to want to spiral around because we did those loose wraps. And you can be OCD and keep adjusting it back and forth, but really all you need to do is just lay down about half the distance here in thread wraps, and then really kind of start to crank now at this point, and then twist it back on top of the shank, and then we'll go back over it, readjusting our pinch now at this point. I kind of made sure I liked where it was. And then I'll pinch it. Notice how I'm lifting that moose hair off of the hook shank body. That kind of helps keep them a little bit secure. And then right here, you don't want to pull too tight, because if I crank down on that, it will fan it. It's not like deer rail care. It's harder to fan this moose hair, but we're practicing good habits here. And so I'm just doing some loose wraps. We've already done the tight wraps to secure it in, and that's just more to keep it a little bit flatter. I don't really want it splayed, and then I'll just pull all these butt ends up at this point, and we'll trim those out, and we're going to be covering that later, but you can go ahead and wrap those ends to the hook shank if you want. So you can see we got a really slender body here, not a lot to it, and there's a reason behind that. We're going to be doing a foam body. This is some Loco foam, but we got to tie in our materials in the order that we are going to be using them, and so we're going to be tying in some 0.2 millimeter wire by Semperfli in gold. So that'll be the last material we use, so we tie it in first. The second, once we get that tied in, I'm going to go ahead and lay it on the top of the hook shank and do a couple securing wraps, keeping it on the top of the shank, and then you can start to twist it to the side. The reason I do that is it helps with that first initial wrap coming up and over. It helps me. I've done it this way, and I won't stop doing it. So if it helps you at all, great. If it doesn't, do it how you want. We have some Whiting Farms. This is a red label it's a pro grade in brown. It's a very unique brown because it's got a lot of different colored feathers in here, almost a brown variant maybe. It's really, really neat, and so I just grabbed one. We're definitely undersizing this hackle here. As you can see, we're going to be doing this with a little bit of a thinner body. I just want to add a little bit of bugginess to it, so we're not getting super crazy with the hackle being, traditionally I would do it to the hook point, but we'll go ahead and tie that in so the concave is going down towards the hook shank, and I'll tie it in so that it's a little bit further up than my gold wire, so that we're wrapping in steps. Now for the body of this, we're going to be using this Loco foam. This is oil slick is the color. It's a black foam. It's about, I think, maybe 2 millimeter, and it's got kind of this oily looking spill on the top of it. It's really, really cool, really unique. And I'm just going to take and cut a strip of it, roughly a 1/16 of an inch, Depending on what size I'm doing, you could go thicker, you could maybe go thinner, but I really want to utilize the characteristics of that flash and that mirage feel. And so you can see there I've got a little strip here, and I'm going to just trim a little bit of that foam off here at the very end for my tie-in, and so that we're not building bulk on that first tie-in. And I'll go ahead and tie it in with the oil slick facing the hook, and I'll just kind of grab that little part that I trimmed off just with a nice little loose wrap there, and then I'll kind of make sure I got it and do a nice securing wrap as I work my way down, and then I will clean up that tag end. Very, very important to trim that foam, otherwise you'll get a hump there, and we're going for kind of a tapered body. And the way I do that is we're going to first, on this first wrap, really kind of stretch that foam. I use my finger on this backside here to hold the foam in place so it doesn't come out, and then I stretch it and then come up and over, and that black is just going to provide a ribbing and also a segmentation that we can wrap our hackle into. And then now that I'm up with this, I'm going to start not stretching as tight to kind of make it a little bit of a taper, and you can see it's got a slight taper but not a ton. You could even go a little bit more, maybe overlap those foam wraps if you want, but I like these slender, and yeah, that's how I do it. So I just going to tie that off with some wraps behind and in front. I'll trim it as flush as I can, leave a little bit of a tag in. This will help prop the wing up, and then I'll just clean that up just a little bit. Now we'll take our hackle, keeping that concave all the way back, and I'll just go ahead and start these wraps here with a full wrap right here in the rear, and then I will just follow those slits in the foam all the way up, kind of giving a natural position for it. You could go in between the foam if you would like, going down the middle, but I want most of that flash to be visible, and so we'll just continue all the way up. And when I get up here, you would think I would stop there, but I want a full wrap right there, and then I will go ahead and tie this off. And we're going to be covering this head with quite a bit of other materials, and so it doesn't have to be super clean, but make sure you've got that hackle secure, and then trim out your end. We're going to save this. That will be our head, and so I'll just go ahead and prep it with that stem, roughly about 3/8, quarter of an inch maybe, so that it gives us a little bit of room to work with. And then we'll go ahead and clean up this, maybe trim out those hairs that might intrude or get in the way on our hook eye. And so we'll go ahead and clean that up, and that looks pretty nice. So you can see we've got a little bit, it's not hackle that's perfectly sized, it's a under hackle in sizing, but it's going to be really awesome. And we're going to counter rib that now with this 0.2 millimeter wire. This is our glue that's going to hold this whole thing together. Notice the underneath this, the wire runs all the way of the hook shank, and then now we're ribbing in between each of these segments to keep that hackle nice and secure. And I'm pulling pretty aggressively on this as I come around, wiggling it back and forth to kind of work my way in and out, minimizing the amount of hackle fibers that I trap to the Loco foam. No sense in doing such a pretty wrap job if we're just gonna mat them all down to the foam, and then they don't really serve any purpose other than maybe covering up the shininess. So we'll do a couple wraps there with the wire, trim it out. I like to do a couple wraps just so that it's secure. I've done it before where I just tie it off and I've had the wire or tippet come out. So I usually do a full wrap of the wire, at least, sometimes two. And if you have any hackle fibers you trapped in your OCD, you can come in with your bodkin. Just be careful not to really damage that foam. It doesn't matter. As soon as a fish bites it, it's going to look like you poked it. But it definitely, I have more confidence in it when I'm looking in my fly box and I got a pretty fly versus one that looks like been chomped around like some bubble gum at a Little League game. So next step, we are not going to use any other flash. I figure we got all the flash in this body, and so I'm just going to grab a clump of this moose hair, and usually for the wing, I double or triple what I did with the tail. It just depends on the size. If I was doing a bigger, like a size 8 in this, or maybe even a size 6, I would definitely double or triple it. If I was going smaller, it's all proportionate. So you got a little bit of room, because as you go smaller, you're going to tie in less fibers for your tail, and et cetera, et cetera. So we'll go ahead and clean those up, get them stacked, and we're going to put them in the same stacker It should fit real nice, and if you can't fit it in because you got too much hair, you probably have too much hair for your wing. So there's a good rule of thumb. It's not a bad stacker. It's probably size of bigger than a pencil. And we'll go ahead and line those tips up. I'm going to do this a little bit longer of a wing just to help with the way it floats. And so I'm going to almost match up those hair tips on the wing with the end of the tail. Usually I like to have those tips end in the middle of the tail, but for this one we'll have them end almost even, just to give it a little bit of a better ride in the water and a little bit more hair to float. And so we'll go ahead and trim out those hairs, and let's clean this up, because if we have a clean head, it makes it a little bit easier for doing hackle wraps, but we're going to cover it with foam, so why does it matter? I argue that if it's clean, it's going to make the foam easier, it's going to make the hackle easier. And so I'm just going to clean it up just to a nice little cone, tapering from the wing all the way down to the eye. And I'm pinching those, the moose hair for my wing, because you don't want to be wrapping it right now and have some of those fibers walk over on you. It also helps hold them in place, so I'm not cranking down as hard and thus cutting the hair. So just a little trick, I just pinch them. They are secure, but these wraps up right there by the wing, I don't do as tight as some of those midway down wraps. And so we'll take that hackle feather, the brown that we already have prepped, and I'll go ahead and tie that in right here on the opposing side with the concave going towards the shank again. And then now we're going to grab some more of this Loco foam and do the same process, just trim out a little bit of the underside, and then we'll go ahead and tie that in right here on the same side. And depending on how you tie this in and how it wants to work with you, this is a unique material. I sometimes struggle. I always try to get 3 wraps with this, but I think on this size and how thick my strip is, I'm probably only going to get 2. And so I'm going to start wrapping this around, and I don't like how that's twisting. See how it's kind of twisting on me? So let's, yeah, I don't like that. Let's try it the other way. So I'm just going to kind of wrap it the other way, and I like that a lot better, but I'm only going to get 2 wraps maybe. Yeah, I like that. So this is going to be a nice little shiny bullet head. And we'll go ahead and secure that with some wraps behind and in front. I always try not to cut this foam so tight that you have to worry about it slipping out, but I do go behind it twice at least to secure that, and I'll go ahead and trim it out and then kind of go over that trimming just a little bit to trap that in and make sure it's nice and secure. And be very careful not to crowd your eye at this point. And now we're on a downward slope. We just got to wrap this hackle coming around, and I'm going to divide my segmentations, give a little bit of a over-hackled head here, and we'll just work our way down, leaving ourselves plenty of room for the tie-off point. And I'd like to do one more, but then I'd crowd the eye, and so I'll end there with working my thread through and just kind of zigzagging, trying not to trap a ton of fibers coming forward and crowding or covering the eye. There's nothing worse than being on the river and your hands are freezing and the wind is blowing and I can't get my tippet through the hook eye. Some I've always struggled with, but I do have personal problems. So let's go ahead and do a single whip finish. I have not trimmed out that hackle yet, just because I want to make sure that it doesn't come slip out at this point. And so I'll do that 3-turn whip finish, crank it down. I'll go ahead and trim out this hackle at this point, get it out of our way, and then I'll go ahead and do another 3-turn whip finish. And you can add a little bit of head cement. But with this wax thread being as grippy as it is, a double 3-turn whip finish is not going anywhere. And so we'll tighten that down and we'll go ahead and trim that out. And there we go. That is a moose hair Loco foam stimulator. Should get the fish's attention. It's got a lot of properties, being super buggy. I like the length of the moose hair for tying some of these larger wings. And you can't go wrong with the brown hackle. It's just awesome. But the key is also having it on a strong hook. I have faith in this as a hook for stimulators, and there we go. I've got a nice little wing profile. Look at that head. Looks pretty good. So thanks for watching.